How's everyone doing? I was just going to do a book review. I've been wanting to review this book, and I know I've been hyping you all up on the last couple of videos talking about doing it. It's Lost Book of Enki, written by Zachariah Sitchin. But first, I'm just going to mention something about Sitchin. He's a cuneiform and Sumerian tablet translator. He did it for 50 years, and there's a lot of people out there that judge him and say that he was outlandish with his views because he was an ancient astronaut theorist. He actually grew up learning Hebrew. He studied the tablets for 50 years. And my point is here on why I do subscribe to the ancient astronaut theory and do believe in his works. First of all, he's a dead man, so I do respect that, and I try not to speak ill of the dead. Second off, I've heard from two different sources that on this globe there is 10 cuneiform translators, and I heard another source say that there's 300. So overall, altogether, on the face of the globe, there's not many cuneiform translators. And I do have to say this, that Zachariah Sitchin, working for 50 years translating the cuneiform tablets, has made his work affordable for poor men like me. I've actually researched other cuneiform tablet translators' books, and they range from like $50, $25, and I picked up used Sitchin books for like $7. I think this one I got for my girlfriend got it for me. She got it probably like $15, $20. So just saying, if you're an author who worked for 50 years and you're genuinely out of the kindness of your heart trying to get the truth out there, don't you think you'd make it more affordable to the common man? Basically, the Lost Book of Enki, it's 14 cuneiform tablets. It's written by a scribe. He's translating the literal words of Enki. His name is Unabsar. And he's the scribe who translated the tablets in cuneiform version. It gets into the Sumerian creation story, which is the Enuma Elish, which I actually skipped while reading this just because I read it in a previous Zachariah Sitchin translation of the cuneiform tablets written in a book called Genesis Revisited. I'm speaking quickly, by the way, just because I'm throwing a lot of information out there. Basically, the concept of the story is that the Enuma Elish is basically kind of like Nibiru came in and was just slamming into other planets, kind of like a pool ball. And while it slammed into other planets, it created moons on those other planets. It threw other planets into their own orbits. It slammed into the Earth, and from the Earth it cracked in fragments and created the moon and the asteroid belt. And basically the essential concept of the story is that Nibiru, after the Enuma Elish, got thrown off into some crazy orbit. And the beginning of the story, it talks about a war on Nibiru, a nuclear war. And they pretty much destroyed their ozone and their atmosphere. And they go into our orbit close enough to Earth every 3,600 years. They call it like a czar or shazar or something like that. And the Anunnaki, the inhabitants of Nibiru, they are technologically more advanced to Earth at that point in time, because at that point in time we're pretty much like Neanderthal, apish creatures. And that's one thing I like about the ancient astronaut theory is it doesn't debunk religion, it doesn't debunk evolution. It goes under a lot of fire itself, but it actually kind of stitches the two together. You can believe in evolution and be an ancient astronaut theorist. You can be an atheist and believe in ancient astronaut theory. You can believe in, you know, it basically stitches together Christianity, Judaism, Sumerian religion, Egyptian religion, and evolution and science, stitches it all together. And you always hear the battle of the evolutionist or atheist fighting against the Christian and or Jew, or and the Christians, and their argument is, well, where's the missing link? And the thing is like, with ancient astronaut theory, it is evolution. Evolution was already going on this earth, but there was divine interference of the Anunnaki. And they came down and altered the DNA span. And they altered, well, we'll get into that in a second. The Anunnaki came down after they fucked up their own planet. And they came down here for gold. Now, their reason for what this book says that the Anunnaki came down for gold was to collect the gold and project it into the atmosphere to protect and fix the ozone. And I'm not saying that's false, but I do have an alternate theory that I don't completely subscribe to. I came up with this myself. My thing is it's gold. So it's gold. It's worth value. Maybe they came down here for greed. Now, they weren't like super technologically advanced. They didn't have flying saucers and all that. A lot of their spacecraft and stuff they were going from Nibiru to Earth on were pretty much what we got now with like NASA and stuff. Shuttles. They describe them as celestial chariots. Basically taking off with a lot of noise and fire and brimstone, pretty much. But they came down here and they were messing around genetically with humans. But that didn't start until they put a base on Mars, supposedly. And actually, in the Lost Book of Enki, they talk about the face of Mars, which that's a whole nother conspiracy theory. I would advise you to check it out because it is cool. But there's a face on Mars that popped up, and Sitchin talks about it in Genesis Revisited. It's a monument, and there's tons of monuments on Mars. There's tons of monuments on the moon, and there's documentaries on both, and tons of photographic evidence. But my thing is a lot of the photo evidence is altered and photoshopped. And I say that because I don't believe in NASA wholeheartedly 100%. I mean, I've seen photos of that NASA has put out, basically photos of Mars, and there's rodents in the background, or it's absurd. And I've found tons and tons and tons of NASA footage, that's been put out there on the internet, and just basically showing the fakeness of NASA, like astronauts' thumbs poking through their astronaut suits while they're working on it, and the guy in the headset is saying, "Hey, we can see your thumbs, we can see your thumbs," and they pull the camera off. And I mean, I've seen where they use the same landscapes in several different footage or photos, but they're supposed to be miles away from it, like on the moon and stuff. But It's funny too because I've actually found like several videos that were put out there and then try to go look it up to show somebody to make them see that I'm not crazy. And like I can't find the videos, and actually my YouTube here at the house on the Xbox was acting funny. They just started blocking me. Like I couldn't watch anything. Like, and it was when I started checking out, these crazy videos that were put out there about anti-NASA pretty much, and like original footage that people had caught and recorded and kept. And like it was like they're like, no, you're not supposed to see that. So they like kind of messed up my Xbox YouTube. I'm not gonna say anything else about that because I don't want my YouTube on my Xbox fucked up again. That's the world we live in. That's a whole nother story. But they explained that basically like one of the Anunnaki like raped a fellow Anunnaki or murdered or something, I can't remember, but got banished to Mars and built the monument, and the monument is his tomb. They came to Earth though and were messing around with let's go back. It was I was talking about the bases they were building on Mars. That's where the Yagigi reside, which they are Anunnaki. They're Anunnaki workers. They worked on Earth and Mars. And they basically created the first strike, according to the cuneiform tablets. They were the first strike. They were bitching and moaning like, man, I don't want to do this anymore. So Enki has the idea. They have labs and stuff that they created, and they're like, well, let's alter the humans. And this gets into the whole tree of life in Eden. The lab that Enki was messing around with was in a place called Eden, Edin. And the Bible took that and deformed it slightly into Eden, the Garden of Eden. And there's actually depictions on cuneiform tablets of the whole creating of the man, altering of the tree of life, which, in case you don't know, the tree of life is not a physical tree, it's the DNA strand. And there's depictions of that also. You can literally look at physical rock carved in stone depictions of the DNA strand, the lab in Eden where they're holding test tubes and altering the human race. So they come up with this creation, Adapa, basically kidnapping some Neanderthal and fucking with the DNA strand. And they got some primitive workers. They got decent ones. And there's a lot of flunk operations and stuff that they created on accident, like just different stuff. Like one of them they fucked up and it had liver failure, and one of them they messed up and it was like literally jizzing all the time, like just crazy shit like that. But they thought they had it mastered. And by the way, we're just catching up to what they're doing now. Like we have shuttles, we have Dolly, like cloning and stuff, stem cell, all that jazz. They talk about that in here in the cuneiform tablets, like thousands of years ago, before we're just now catching up to it. And so they have the primitive workers, and one of the Anunnaki noticed, hey man, they're not mating with each other. Like, so we can keep creating them with this slow process, but can't we get them to mate with each other? So they create Adamu and Tiamat, which Adamu is Adam, Tiamat is Eve. Adamu, Adam, Tiamat, Eve. And they create their offspring. That's the first ones that can mate. And they create Abael, and Cain. Abel and Cain, Cain and Abel, Cain, Cain. Cain, K-A-I-N, Cain, C-A-I-N, Abael, Abel, Abel, Abel. And it's basically the same story. That's when after they actually got their creation to breed with one another, the offspring, they taught Abel to, and I'm going to use the Christian references, so hope I don't offend anybody or anything. But Abel basically they assigned the job and taught him how to be a shepherd. And like I said, this goes back to Dolly and cloning and stuff. Dolly, like the first clone sheep, they were teaching him to tend the fields and be a shepherd. And Cain, they taught him to be a farmer, pretty much. And they have the whole Cain murders Abel, gets banished by the Anunnaki under Anunnaki trial, and goes off and makes his own race of people. And like the mark of Cain, as far as the book of Enki is like his mark was they genetically altered him to where he couldn't grow a beard. So I mean that could be why certain races and stuff on Earth can't grow beards and stuff. There's several other different biblical characters in there. One of them, which I was kind of interested in, was Ibram, Ibruum, which would be Abram. And my name is Abraham, obviously, if you haven't figured that out by my channel, Abe Williams. And Abraham's original name was Abram, but that actually comes from, obviously, the earlier version of the Bible, the unadulterated version, and the cuneiform name for him was Ibram, Ibruum. He's a character. There's another one, Enki, which would be Enoch, which I've talked about him in previous videos. There's a book of Enoch, which the Vatican took out of the Bible. Basically, I didn't know about it until I came across it, getting into the ancient astronaut theory and stuff. I ran across like videos on the Book of Enoch, and I read a book. It's Secret Archives of the Vatican. Secret Archives of the Vatican, which I'll do a book review later on, and I think I've mentioned that in previous videos. But they took it out, and they just, in the book, they're just kind of like, oh, that was just outlandish stuff. They're talking about giants and the sons of God coming down and mating with the daughters of Eve, and they kind of demonized them, and it's like literally demonized them. And it's like, well, that was all like Pulp Fiction, so that's why they removed it from the Bible. And I'm like, wait, that sounds cool as hell. Why aren't you letting? What do you mean they removed it because it was weird and strange? It's like there's tons of strange stuff in the Bible, and you're taking out all the good stuff. That's the stuff I want to read. Demons coming from the sky and mating with women and creating giants, you know? And then people all over the world finding these giant skeletons in the Smithsonian Museum, just snatching them up and putting them in the basement. That's what I want to hear about. But that's another video for another day. By the way, there's video evidence and thousands of newspaper articles. Check out Trey Smith. Check out his channel. Shout out to Trey Smith. He's exposed a lot of that, and a lot of other people have. Gets into like the biblical Noah, which I kind of skipped over that in the book just because I had read the Epic of Gilgamesh. And Noah comes from Utnapishtim, and Utnapishtim actually comes from an earlier story, and his name was Ziasudra. But in the book of Enki, it kind of explains, like, a lot of people, they bash on Christianity and they hate on Christianity about how could they fit two of every animal in a ship, And then the Bible gives out the measurements of the ship, and they're like, well, this is physically impossible. So there we go, we destroyed Christianity. But when you actually read the cuneiform version, the lost book of Enki, the ancient astronaut theory, like, basically Enki got a vision from a dream from this guy, Galzu, which was like a servant of the creator of all, which the creator of all is the god of the Nebruins, the ancient Sumerians, which actually is probably the coolest religion on the face of the earth. They simply called God the creator of all. That's it. They didn't have Jesus and Jehovah and Allah and all this craziness we got now. That was the original God, simply creator of all. But Enki gets this vision from a servant of the creator of all. His name's Galzu, and he tells him to select Utnapishtim Ziusudra to create literally a submarine. It can float on top of the water and can be submerged without sinking and drowning everything in it. But Enki takes all his little DNA samples of the animals on the face of the earth in his lab in Eden and gives it to Ziusudra. So that does make sense. And the Bible has definitely changed a lot of basically original text. As far as Egyptian and Sumerian, it's taken it and kind of perverted it in a way. And I don't mean that perverted in a derogatory term. I mean it as in they altered it. So it does make sense. If there was a ship that could be above and underwater, and two of every animal, but they don't mean it physically, they mean it DNA of two in every animal in test tubes. So it would fit in the ship. The book definitely, I do have to say this, the negative thing about it is it does need a second read because the gods change their names throughout the book. They tell you they're changing their name. So I found myself going to the glossary over and over, like, who is this again? Who is this again? And it gets into, like, super deep into the family trees and stuff, which, speaking of family trees, it's pretty cool. I did a review a while back on the Epic of Gilgamesh. I would suggest you read that before this because it's shorter and easier to digest. But read it, and this book, Lost Book of Enki, actually gets into Gilgamesh's heritage. It gets into his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, which is pretty cool because reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, I did kind of wonder, like, well, where'd Gilgamesh come from? What was his background? What was his family tree? And, that ancient history, like, so that was kind of cool. But yeah, and the book itself is written, let's see if I can show you. It's written in kind of like, well, because it's translations of cuneiform and stuff, written like poetry style. So it's like 300 something pages, but it's all like double spaced. I've actually had people pick up the book and they're like, what are you reading? And they're like, why is it typed like that? Because it's kind of like Romeo and Juliet, like poetry style. Epic form, where it's translated. And the Bible's the same way. When you read the Bible, it's thee and thou and all that. And it's written the same way. It is a little frustrating to read it, and it's kind of like thee and thou, kind of King James-ish. But at the very end, I did want to bring this point up, and spoiler alert, if you don't want to know the end of the story, don't listen to it. But if you don't really care because you're going to read it yourself, it doesn't matter. I had talked about it in a previous video, and if you want to check that video out again, it's called Kebra Nagast, Solomon's son, something along those lines was the title. But at the very end of the book, after basically doing everything they did, they destroy the world. Neanderthal, Nanerta and Nergal destroy the world with nuclear bombs. And a lot of people are going to be like, well, there should be evidence of that, you know. And I spoke about it in a previous video, that there actually is evidence of that. Like, there's deserts in the Middle East right now, ancient deserts that are like sheets of glass. Certain areas are sheets of glass and have high level radiation. But just strange things like that, like Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel is mentioned in there, but it's from an ancient astronaut perspective, created by Marduk, which is actually the first king of Babylon, which, as far as Babylonian mythology and all that, he's supposedly like historical. I haven't got into Babylonian mythology and stuff. That actually derives from the Sumerian, and because Sumeria and Babylon, it's ancient Iraq. But the Tower of Babel, Marduk built it because he was rebelling against the Anunnaki. And it's basically, he built it to be a shuttle station, a gateway from Earth to heaven, to shoot off into the skies in a shuttle. And he had human workers and Anunnaki workers, and all the other Anunnaki were like, fuck this, no. So they came in and battled with them and split the tongues, the language of the people, split the people up, and basically the Anunnaki individually went to separate lands to teach them language and writing, so that way we would not unify and basically have a space program. But I mean, NASA's a space program, if you wink wink, like if you believe in everything they say. Most of their stuff is CG, and a lot of it, I've seen tons and tons of footage of it, of where it's been debunked and falsified on, you know. I've seen behind the scene footage of NASA that we weren't supposed to see. And that's why I got my YouTube account blocked on Xbox, man. I swear that's the reason. But Lost Book of Enki, read it, definitely. It's awesome. I was talking about Book of Enoch. That's going to be my next book I'm going to read. Book of Enoch, I'm pretty stoked. I can't wait to read it. But everybody have a good night.